Okay, we're back to fabric painting, and we have at this stage got our design transferred onto our fabric. The next thing that's really important is to secure your fabric onto a piece of paper. You could use something just like newspaper or a piece of white bond paper, just so that when you are painting, if the paint seeps through to the other side, first of all, it doesn't damage your tabletop, but also more importantly is that if you need to move it, that you actually have the whole thing going with you at a time. Often when you're painting, you might want to turn your design around, and that is really helpful. So let me explain to you a little bit about how the paints work. Think of baking. When you've mixed up a cake and you've got your batter, you want to add some color to it. So you haul out your food coloring, which is a concentrated color, and as you put drop for drop in, the color gets more intense. Well, think of fabric painting like that. For fabric painting, you get in quite large quantities. This jelly-like medium, which is called many names. Sometimes it's called extender, sometimes it's called clear cut, sometimes it's called emulsion. But as you can see, it's completely colorless. It is a water-based product, so it isn't any harm to you. But in order to be able to make paint, the manufacturers of fabric paint will take a concentrated pigment, and think of this as being your food coloring, and add drop for drop into a large quantity of this extender, and that makes your paints. Okay, so now you know how to get bulk for fabric paints. You can mix your own. If you go to a screen printing supply or you go onto Amazon, I'm sure you could find it, and you'd be able to mix your own colors. So for here, what I've done is onto a foamer-like tray, I have some extender, I have some magenta pigment, which is the paint, and I have some green. And I'm just going to show you how things work with the actual fabric paints. So if I was to take this magenta, sorry, I'm just going to swap my brushes at this point, it's too big. If I was to take the magenta on its own and to start to paint that directly onto the petal, it's going to soak into the fabric almost instantly, and I can't shift it at all, which means that I've got to go over and over and over, and as I go over and over and over, I get a more and more solid color. But if I was to take some extender on my brush, which I've done here, and to take the paint that I've got there, I can move that color from what I've already painted, the color that's sitting on the surface, and I can move it to the outside edge of my petal design. So you can see that in that actual one petal, I'm getting some light and some dark. You can go over this again if you wanted to get it all one color, that would be up to you, but it does allow you to take the contrasts. So knowing that things that are in the recessed areas are usually darker, I might select to do this next little petal just with plain paint. And don't worry if your edges don't meet up exactly with the ones in front, because we will actually scratch into the paint, and I'll show you how to do that. This next one being in the light, I think what I'm going to do with this one first of all is to put my extender down first, and you can see because I have already got a little bit of pigment on my brush, it's actually giving me a bit of color. So having got that there, I can already create color without actually having to put any more paint. I'm going to do the same with this one here, because I do want contrast between the petals to be able to make them to stand out. Otherwise they all look very flat indeed. Okay, and then this last petal here, which is really a big one, will be exposed to much more light, so I'm going to use a fair amount of extender. And you can still see the outlines, even though maybe on camera it's not showing so well. But you can. Now remember that your brush strokes are going to be part of your design, so use them to flow with the actual design that you're doing. And this scent a little bit here will be fairly dark, just so that it's reflecting the center, because it's got a bit of depth. Now here's some magic. All you do is you take the back of your paintbrush and you scratch into the paint where you traced your outlines. So your outlines aren't that visible now, but you will know where they are, and by tracing into the outlines, you are creating a little bit of detail. As I said to you, there are things such as fabric liners that you could use later on, but that would be nice. If this was something like a daisy, I could use the back of my brush to create little dots. to make that center look more like that, but not so much. Anyway, so now that I've done that, I can actually then allow this to dry completely. And even at a later stage, if I wanted to come back and just maybe add in a little bit more detail here, I could happily do so. There's one line I've missed here. Just give me a second. The nice thing about having an extender in your paint, even though it has already had some when it was manufactured, is that it makes it more creamy, which gives you a bit more flexibility. There we go. That's how that's meant to be. So now I'm going to actually just take a little bit of my magenta off. And I do like to actually work with the same colors over and over, because in nature you'll find that a lot of the colors in nature are reflections of what's already been underneath. The same thing here with the little calyx petals. I can actually use a little bit of extender, and the extender then actually seals the surface so that I'm able to brush over that with another color. You can see I'm not fussed about having a little bit of the red showing through. Nature is like that. Some parts are brighter than others, some parts are lighter or darker than others, and some parts have been chewed by caterpillars. There's all sorts of things, so don't worry about it too much. It adds to the character of your design, and it also helps when you're doing fabric painting not to be too fussy about it. You know, don't be that it's got to be absolutely perfect. The more you kind of slosh the colors are, the bigger the effect will be once it's actually finished. So having now painted this, I can add on and increase the intensity of the color till I'm actually happy with what I've got. Use this flat edge, which is known as a chisel shaped brush, to simply bring your color to the edge. You can see I'm using that flat edge to my advantage there. And you might find that when you're doing smaller areas like this, you want to actually change your brush sizes quite often. If you're not an experienced painter, you can do that quite easily. Okay, so for the leaves, I'm going to do this slightly differently. I'm going to take my green with some extender, and I'm just going to mix a little bit on my palette. I'm actually going to just put color on my whole leaf, which I know at this stage sounds a little bit crazy, but remember that this extender is actually going to seal my fabric. And then I'm going to work on top of this. Right, so I've got the basics down here. Now I'm going to come back in here, not using the extender so much, but working just with the actual ready mixed green, which is a much more intense color. And again, there is a movement in this leaf, so I'm going to actually use the brush strokes to add to that detail. Okay, use your flat edge of your chisel shaped brush to get those nice shapes of the edges of the leaves. There you go. All the way down, so you're bringing it all towards the middle where the actual veins of the leaf are. And you can see, because the paint is so beautifully transparent, that as I'm painting green over the red or the magenta, it's fading into the background, which is just what I wanted to do. Right, so now that I've got this on, I'm going to leave some of these brush marks here because they will dry as part of the design. I'm going to do the same thing that I did there. Is I'm going to take the back of my paintbrush and I'm going to use this to create the detail. So draw your lines coming in so that you've actually got a nice outline. And as I said before, you want to be big and bold with fabric. You don't want to be too fiddly when you come to do this style of painting, especially when you get onto something like a tablecloth. Now for the stem, if you take green, which is a mixture of blue and yellow, and you mix some red or this pink in, you're going to start getting a brown. So you can see very easily, just with these two colors and a bit of extender, I'm able to create all the colors that I need to paint this rose. So here goes my little stem. If I wanted to make it change, then I can actually play around with my extender and with the paints, but I'm going to do a whole video on mixing colors and paint so that you've got some sort of an idea of what's happening. It's slightly grainy there, so I'm going to pick up a little bit of my extender, brush it over the edges, and you'll see that that doesn't look grainy anymore, but it just looks like light and dark paint. And then I'm going to come back over that with some more paint just to increase the intensity of the color. Okay, so just as a very quick way of introduction to the paints, I hope that gives you some ideas just so that you can see what the extender does in your actual fabric painting and how you can use it very quickly and simply to your advantage. Obviously, there's much more to go with this and much more detail, but in my next video where I start to explain color mixing, I will show you what to do with it, and then there'll be a whole video on using techniques with the extender so that you can play to your advantage to create beautiful things. Thank you for joining me this time, and please subscribe to my channel